Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
The companies that are more mid-market that you have to do some research and find often will give you an account manager. They'll treat you, you'll be a big enough account to them that they will treat you well and help you when all of this chaos is going on, help you understand, take the time with you that the biggest guys can't.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Nanad and I are excited to welcome Brian Glick, founder and CEO of Chain.io. Brian's career in logistics started in the late 90s with OHL, now Geodis, where he spent over 11 years climbing to the ranks of Senior Director of Global Freight Management IT Solutions. He then launched his first logistics software startup, Aspect 9, then transitions to Vandergrift Forwarding Company for 5 years, and in 2017 launches Chain.io to the market. Brian, it's so great to have you join us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Man, I gotta say, all these 3PLs teach you a lot, right? Like when you work at the likes of Geodis, OHL, right? Like just the perspective that you get on different things in life or different parts of supply chain, they teach you stuff really quickly versus working in like one company that does supply chain versus work for a 3PL or a logistics company that's in the service side of things. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was interesting. I started on the customs brokerage side and then had to learn the warehousing business and then had to learn the truck brokerage business and then had to learn the international freight pricing business, and every year was something new through that journey.
I mean, I like to say that, most likely your 18 years into logistics tech trenches is equivalent to probably 237 years in any other industry, right? I mean, it's challenging, demanding, constantly evolving. So really, I think the burning first question for you is, what glaring problem did you see in the market after spending 18 years in the space, which was the genesis for launching Chain.io, and what has that journey been like for you?
So I was really fortunate to be in a position where I was very deeply involved in sales and executive account management at the same time that I was running an IT department. And what I began to see was we would go out on sales calls, have to make lots of promises, and then when I would come back to the office, the person who was going to yell at me was me. And that's an awkward position to be in. We would fight with our software vendors who were wonderful people, but didn't want to build the customizations that our customers needed as a freight and customs provider. They wanted to stay in their wheelhouse, and our customers needed lots of things, and we started building them, and we were pretty good at it, but the friction was unbelievable, and the amount that IT was in the way of progress, even though we wanted to be helpful, was indicated to me that there was a deeper problem and that you couldn't solve it inside of any particular provider. You needed to create something neutral to allow information to move more smoothly so that salespeople could sell, compliance people could do compliance, freight people could move freight, and we didn't all have to beg for IT resources all the time. And that was before APIs and blockchain and pandemics and all of that fun stuff made it, just brought all of that to the surface even more.
You know what? And 3PLs doing what 3PLs do is make money. Sounds very familiar. Both Dan and I also come from the 3PL space, and it's like selling is one side of it to that point, right? And so I was always on the software side of things. So the sales guys would take me as the pre-sales engineer type person that's going to sit at the table and just go, yes, absolutely, we can do that, right? And then, come back and your boss is like, what did you promise? Are we really going to do that? Our vendors can't do that, and having to execute upon it.
But the sales guy told me I wasn't allowed to go to lunch unless I said yes.
That's why the high fives after winning a deal and the celebration is about 3 seconds, because on second 4, you have that oh shit moment, like, all right, now we have to deliver. Now we got to fulfill those promises.
Yeah, and it's funny, from day one, even though we're appear to be a tech company, I've always thought of us as much as a sales enablement tool as a tech company. And we actually give collateral to our logistics service provider customers on how to present that they can give to their sales team and rebrand on how to present IT services in a way that makes them easier to implement, because you're working with the shipper from day one of the sales process to understand how your IT works and how it does. So we sort of do that all the way from the beginning. So then by the time it becomes a systems problem, everyone understands what we're actually talking about. We don't get into those situations where you say, oh, we're going to deliver invoicing, and for 6 months you were talking about the freight invoice and they thought you were talking about consuming a commercial invoice. And then the IT team goes, what are you talking about? We don't do commercial invoices. We're not a customs broker, right? Like those are the real things that happen when the communication doesn't start well up front.
Completely agree. And maybe let's just dive right into the deep end, brother, right? Like B2B. Let's think about, some of the audience that we have, direct to consumer brands, seen a lot of success, or they are still going through some major movement in the direct to consumer space. And that universe is fairly talking about, from an integration perspective, a simpler one, right? Relatively speaking, right? Like you got a site, you have an ERP system, goes into your warehouse, you execute stuff, and on that front. But then there is the entire concept of procurement, inbound logistics, B2B on the outbound side as well, right? It's fairly complex. Why is it complex, Brian? Why have we not been able to simplify? Because there is a lot of fear. Or is it complex? I want to hear from you. What are you seeing out in the market? Are things changing for new entrants to easily adopt and get in, be it EDI compliance or working with trading partners, working with, manufacturers overseas and being compliant, etc.?
It is complex. Part of the reason it's complex is the number of parties that are involved in doing anything tends to be higher. Right? So you think about that delivery, literally the simplest example, right? Which is somebody's gonna order something, I'm gonna fulfill it using a parcel carrier, I'm gonna print a label, put it on a box, and the parcel carrier is gonna pick it up and they're gonna deliver it to the consumer. It's you, it's the consumer, and it's the parcel carrier, and you're done. You need to bring a container of product in order to have something to fulfill to the consumer from Southeast Asia. There can be over 100 different parties involved in that one activity, and every time you do it, it's not the same 100 parties. So it's you, it's the vendor, it's the export customs broker, it's the import customs broker, it's the ocean carrier, it's the steamship line that actually operates the feeder vessel that gets it from where your factory is to Singapore so that it can be put on a bigger vessel. It's the 4PL, the freight audit and pay company, and it goes on and on and on. And that is a much more complicated world. The good news is when you're small, you generally go to a full service provider, whether that's FedEx, a supply chain, or whether that's a Flexport or somebody like that who kind of masks all of that for you. But as you get bigger, you start having needs to peel that apart because you want to optimize your payment terms, or you want to start routing things differently. And there's this really uncomfortable period when you're doing, say, more than 1,000 but less than 100,000 shipments a year. It's a big range where you end up in these very uncomfortable spots where you have to take a lot more control, but you don't necessarily have the expertise. That's when it gets really, really hard, is that middle tier. So sorry to say it is hard.
It is complicated. Anytime I get asked about it, I say, there is no easy button other than, yes, go into a service provider, a full service provider. Got to work on their terms. If you don't have the volume, you're going to have to work on whatever margin goes into it. But, or your overall supply chain cost that goes into it. But that's what makes sense. But as you start that point around optimization, it starts becoming a critical need very quickly, especially if you have a global operation or even a multi-country operation, right? It starts becoming super important that you take as much control as possible. And I guess that's where you come in, Brian?
How do
you help?
Yeah, we help. And the other thing that helps a lot is we enable a lot of the mid-market service providers to work with mid-market companies, which can be very hard because you start getting to that point as a brand where you do need some of this IT integration. You're doing enough shipments that you can't log into the carrier's website every day and just see what's going on. You need it to start feeding into your Blue Cherry system or your, God forbid, SAP at a certain point, but whatever systems you're tracking things in. And at that point, it's sometimes hard for the service providers to adapt to your needs and hard for you to adapt to theirs. And that's where a network in the middle can help everyone be more digital, be more automated without everyone having to bend their systems together. Another little piece of advice that we should have mentioned when it comes to all those parties is it is really valuable, and I think it's something that as companies are growing, they don't think about, is to choose providers who are the right size for them. What I mean by that is at the beginning, I think it is very helpful sometimes to work with a really big company where you're just one in a billion shipments and you just want the package to move. As you get bigger, it is often important to think about what is your size fish in their pond, right? You don't want to always be the biggest fish in someone's pond. You don't want, your cousin who moves 3 shipments a year and suddenly you're giving him 600 containers. But the companies that are more mid-market that you have to do some research and find often will give you an account manager. They'll treat you, you'll be a big enough account to them that they will treat you well and help you when all of this chaos is going on, help you understand, take the time with you that the biggest guys can't.
I think that's a great point. Brian. And maybe just going back to something you had talked about earlier about that scenario with the invoices, right? And the confusion around, what type of invoice was it? One of the things we had actually talked about on our pre-call and thinking about, my experience being 20 years in this space, when you think of like first mile, middle mile, last mile, that means something to me and to a lot of people that are, mid-market brands or 3PLs. And usually that last mile is the shipment, the order that gets delivered at the doorstep. So maybe for those companies that are going to start looking for the right vendors, define in your world, what is first mile, middle mile, and last mile?
So first mile from my perspective as someone who comes from more of the sourcing side of the supply chain, is defined as what does it take to get the product, and again, these definitions are very loose, but from your supplier who's actually manufacturing it into your supply chain, right? So some people would say that's everything from the factory till you have it in inventory. Some would say everything from the factory until you own it, which may just be when it gets on the vessel in Shanghai. But sort of that chunk that you think about as that early stage, and then the middle would be effectively that last transportation and the actual warehouse operations. And, we would think of all of the delivery activities as last mile, and that first mile, as you move more to B2B and you're moving into customers where you are sending large amounts of product potentially directly to their facilities from overseas, and you have real commit dates. You can't just pull the product off of Shopify if you're out of inventory. You tell TJX that I'm going to give you 14 containers of purses. You better have 14 containers of purses on August 2nd, because if they're not there on August 2nd, you're going to start taking penalties. And if they're not there on August 20th, you're probably getting your order canceled. That first mile, that what is happening at the factory, is it going to get on the vessel, how is it moving, becomes mission critical just as much as that last mile delivery.
That's a super important point, right? And maybe if we were to talk about standardization a little bit, right, Brian? I know you lit up the last time we spoke about this, right? And I light up too, man, because I have not been around as long as Dan has been around, but I remember good old days when there was a level of standardization, right? Like in application standardization, but more importantly in integration standardization. It was, yes, EDI. No one wants to talk about EDIs, but EDIs were standard. There was a standard. There was AS2 connections. And as APIs kind of started showing up and, you can connect all of this so easily because there is like APIs, whatnot, right? It seems more complicated now, and it should have not been the case. Like, where are we going, man? Like, are we going to achieve some level of standardization and how systems talk to each other in supply chain?
Standardization as a concept, the opposite of standardization to me is not chaos, it's innovation. And you standardize something once it has become uninteresting to the stakeholders and it's no longer a competitive advantage. So the reason you don't see Amazon pushing for warehousing and distribution standards or Walmart pushing for them is because that is a competitive advantage to them and they want to maintain that differentiation. So when we talk about things like ocean freight that have been going on for a very long time, there's a push for standardization there and it works. And we've had EDI for 50 years because nobody's winning a piece of ocean freight based on how you send the booking message to the carrier or how they send you a milestone. So the areas where we're really innovating, whether that's the entire last mile, right? The entire concept of e-commerce is too young, in my opinion, for true standardization, or whether it's things like dynamic pricing for freight. These are not areas that are ready for standardization because people are still trying to be creative, and you can't be creative and have a standard at the same time. It's definitionally opposed. APIs make standards harder because every programmer gets a lot of power to just do whatever the heck they want. I think that's the way the world's moving, and it's part of why we founded this company. Was I started seeing in 2015, 2016, this trend line starting. And we said, what we do is we build plugins to all of the other people's APIs so that they work together, because I don't see standardization in supply chain writ large being the trend right now, because people are trying to innovate and they realize how strategically important it is to people's brand identity. And people are not going to want to standardize something that is critical to their brand, right? And critical to beating their competitor in the marketplace. So instead, we have to figure out how to work well together outside of the standards.
I even have to say, even on the EDI front, right? Recently, I won't name names, but like one of those like broker companies in the EDI space did an extract for me for 20 retailers, right? Like 20 retailers for just a purchase order EDI file. And you look at that, and between the 20 of them, other than what field does the PO go in and what field the quantity goes in, and I wouldn't even say the SKU. Everything else is different, right? Like how they utilize it, what field it is. There is APIs make it way more complex, but EDI was supposed to be a standard. What happened there?
Well, I'll tell you, it does one thing really well and it does another thing kind of poorly. The thing it does really well is it standardizes what business process you're talking about. If someone says, I'm sending you an EDI 850, you know that is a sourcing purchase order. You absolutely know that concept. So you don't get to the end of a project and realize you were talking about two different things. What it doesn't do is standardize the fact that people have different structures of their purchase orders. I had a great example, two major apparel brands. This is, it's 25 years ago. I could probably say who they were. It was Ann Taylor and Ralph Lauren. And I was working on concurrent projects for them many, many years ago. And they both had this concept of a pre-pack. And one of them meant essentially poly bags that would go be the SKU in the warehouse of like 3 mediums and a small and a large that they could then pick and send to a store. The other was talking about a case pack structure for cross-docking. And they were both using the word pre-pack in their EDI standard. And we were trying to write a common website that was rendering this information. And it took us like a year to figure out that we were talking about two different things and trying to make them into the same concept. And that literally that topic came up Tuesday with another customer that we have who's 20 years later. But that's another example of innovation where Ann Taylor and Ralph Lauren both 20 years ago were doing very innovative things. Cross-docking was new back then. And the idea of a polybag pre-pack set of sizes that you could take all the way to the shelf before the employee has to rip it open and it's all pre-folded and just drops right on the shelf was absolutely unheard of 25 years ago. So we had a standard and we had innovation, and the innovation was happening inside of the standard. But at least we knew we were talking about purchase orders, right? So they take us to a certain point, but it's not to plug and play.
Absolutely. And it's not like on our side, right? Like the outbound logistics side of the universe as well, there is good standardization, like with all the APIs that are available, because that industry pretty much now runs on APIs to a large extent. You should see the definition of a SKU we cannot agree on. Like, I'm not even joking, right? Like Shopify does not mandate SKU. They create an internal variant ID and that's what it is. And so everyone operates off of that. And it's like, guys, what about the logistics guys, right? Like we need the SKU because we don't consider variants. They are just styles. We got to operate off SKUs. And yeah, we don't have standardization even within the outbound, but there is still normalization that can be done because you don't have as many big players out there, or, and everyone's kind of following what the big ones are doing.
And I would say those of us, and I'll include Shopify in this, who came up through the apparel industry heavily are the worst at it, right? You go to pharma, they're pretty clear on what a SKU is, right? And if I'm going to ship finished products, how many, even I have 20 pills in this bottle and 40 in this one, that those are different things, right? And food is pretty clear most of the time. You're not going to go to Quaker and the chocolate granola bars and the peanut butter are not going to just be called the granola bars. Fashion, apparel, awful awful, and where I've spent most of my career, style, color, size, and where's the SKU and what happens. I can make it worse for you. In the customs world, we used to have a customer who same SKU year over year for the t-shirts, but they would make them out of different materials in the summer and the winter. And so it was 100% cotton in certain seasons and it was a blend in other seasons, and customs cares. And we'd be like, well, which one is this shipment? Is this the thing? Or oh, no, it's just the shirt that we sell. It's the white t-shirt. Okay, I can't just tell the customs officer it's the white t-shirt. Just don't worry about it. So yeah, it's really bad.
Exactly. Now, for the same SKU, add 2 different manufacturers in 2 different countries and you had a country of origin switch. Yeah.
And a free trade agreement in the middle for fun.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's the same SKU, guys, right? Like it's the same stuff, same material. Very interesting.
I mean, don't you guys think about this? We're talking about the same problem that surfaced and you saw 20 years ago, Brian, like here today in 2022. And, as you guys were talking about standardization, I just have to, I'm a Pittsburgh guy. So our head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin, is very clear that he says almost every week, the standard is the standard, right? And it's, I'm hearing you guys, and maybe this is a question just to go out to both of you, like these problems, the opportunity to address these problems are in front of us every day. A lot of what we see on a day-to-day basis, almost feels like Groundhog Day a little bit, right? Like what we saw 5 years ago, we're still seeing today. And it's a great opportunity. And it's a great opportunity for us to share with the audience how to think about things, how to help them, give them a little bit of insight. What are you both most excited about? Like when you think of like having the same conversation with a different company 20 years ago, even though Ann Taylor was maybe ahead of their time, what excites you about what innovation is down the pike or what's going to be coming up in the next 6 to 12 months that maybe helps the standard be the standard or reduces the level of complication with these integrations?
So I would say I'm excited that for the first time, the physical carriers on the air and ocean side of the world are buying into understanding the underlying business processes and documenting them and being more clear about them. And I don't think anything will, again, standards are not going to fix innovation. We've covered that. But when it starts from that ground level of the vessel operates in a standard way, just like you don't expect a flight from, American and United to really kind of, you go to the airport, it's going to be the same functional thing. They're starting to do more standardization. The airlines are committing to, more electronic data transfer. And when those ground level pieces work better, then it becomes much easier for the tech companies that sit on top of that provide visibility, that provide, automation, that do all of these things that ultimately result in the brands that are listening being able to put the little dot on the map for the consumers so that the thing that you're drop shipping from China has the same visibility as the Domino's Pizza app. All of that, we're doing the ground level work and it is happening. And I don't feel that those parties were motivated to make this happen until the last 5 years. So way overdue, but I sit in the conferences with the senior executives at the ocean liners and the airlines, and they are really committed to getting the foundational pieces right so that you can build the APIs and the innovation on top of that.
And I'll kind of second that on the front that a lot of the traditional giants are either on a path or they have already gone through a digital transformation journey, right? And what we mean by that is like this API first, cloud native application strategy for wanting to play nicer with the world. And then, the compute power, the capabilities, companies like Brian's companies, right, that have this really good groundswell to be able to solve for complicated problems and not having to go to the existing oligopolies that move slow, where if I need an EDI, and I said it, right? But if you needed an EDI integration, you got to wait 3 months in line and then do the testing and then get it going. Like it has to be faster. I get it. It's not going to be standardization completely, right? But innovation is playing a really big part where it is uncomplicating it, right? Like it is helping things move forward. And I'm super excited to see where all the tech ends up going from here. Like I'm always excited about the tech.
It's a dirty little secret. We actually sometimes prefer when our customers come to us with just EDI because we don't have to do the business process mapping. We know what they mean. So like we actually get excited when they're like, oh, we're just going to send you an EDI file and then you deal with the API on the other end. That is an easier project for us. So I am still a fan of EDI, even though that is not a popular thing to say in the present world.
So I think, Brian, talking about all the innovation that's coming up, launching Chain.io, right? You were successful in raising a few rounds and don't want to, we're not here to kind of dive into all the horror stories and great stories and bloody knuckles, I'm sure, and everything in between. But, before things changed in the last couple months, you were able to raise a Series A. So first of all, congrats on that. That was awesome to see, and obviously really good timing as well. There is a lot of innovation that's needed in the space today. So for supply chain tech companies that are looking to solve a problem, trying to help simplify the world of integrations and applications, any advice for a company that's maybe looking to do a raise in the near future, considering all the economic, the change in the economic climate?
Yeah, I think I have two pieces of advice for supply chain companies. One, very quickly qualify whether the investor you're trying to pitch understands what supply chain is and how big it is and where you fit into it. So for us, I would really quickly, if an investor just didn't understand, so I don't understand how this international supply chain thing is big, we would just, okay, we're never going to work with you. You're never going to understand us, and I'm not going to be able to explain it to you. So we qualified out very quickly on that. And the other is that supply chain is a very trust-based industry, right? Whether if you're a service provider or a software that supports a service provider, people are putting their brand in your hands. It's not a consumer app that if you screw up, if you screw up Twitter tomorrow, I'll just stop using Twitter. If you screw up the thing that delivers my product to Macy's, I got a problem. And so you need investors who understand that. And we raised from some really great funds, primarily in and around the Midwest for that reason. So Fontinalis and High Alpha and Grand Ventures and Mercury, who all, Tech Square, I should not, I'm going to get in trouble if I forget to, it's like an Oscar speech, but they all take a long view, and they all understood what we were trying to build, and that neutrality was important, and that this week's revenue is less important than building the network and building the trust with our partners. And I think if you're in supply chain and your investors push you to do stupid things for short-term benefits, you're going to lose the trust of the industry, and then you're out. And I think that, you got to take sometimes you just got to take money, but that's the conversation to have early to make sure that you don't end up in bed with an investor that's going to push you in the wrong direction.
That's awesome advice. Also,
the ones that will give you a check are the ones you should talk to, because ultimately you need the money too. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, but you're spot on, right? Like going to an investor that does not know this space and basically having a conversation. And if they start with, of course, right, like everyone wants that top-down or bottom-up approach of like, how big is this space, right? Like, or, your particular solution. But if the question is like, how big is supply chain, right? Like, what are you trying to go after? Why is this important? Like if they are a apparel investor, like they might be interested in expanding their supply chains and for their, portfolio of brands. But go into someone that actually understands it is super critical for you to also get the value. And Brian, I would assume it's also, if they are savvy in that space, then they can also help you with the connections and, get you in the phone calls and whatnot.
And give you good advice.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, look, I've been doing this a long time, but we don't really get a lot of supply chain advice from our investors. But the other day, I had a board meeting where they told me I was being stupid and I was about to make a huge mistake that they've seen a bunch of companies make. And I was able to listen to them and not make the mistake. That's what a good partnership with an investor looks like, not someone who's just going to get out of your way and let you have easy board meetings, because where's the value? That's, they say smart money and dumb money. And smart money to me is people who are going to challenge you and tell you when you're being stupid. So, and you make a lot of mistakes when you do a startup. You make more mistakes than you make good decisions, frankly. And it's just a question of targeting the mistakes towards the little things and the good decisions towards the big things.
Wise words, my friend.
Yeah. So is that important to you as you were doing the Series A round, then just to look for more than just a check, look for those that could be strategic partners and really kind of been there, done that, and help you on the journey?
100%. And there's a couple pieces. The biggest one was making sure that we were raising from funds who were used to investing in companies at our stage, right? You get somebody who's too far ahead, too far behind. They're expecting a different size and shape of company and they don't know how to work with you. But the other is I would give them effectively that speech in the first meeting, and it's a partnership and a relationship that you're going to have for a decade. It's not, it's dating, it's not sales, right? In the sense that it's got to work for both parties. And yes, you meet a lot of people and yes, you're kind of pitching, but you need to be able to get up in the morning and talk to these people and go to them when you have a problem and feel like they're not going to just chew on you and bully you around. And so you really have to qualify it from both sides, because what's the point of taking the money if it's just going to make you miserable for the next 5 years?
Makes sense.
Right? Because you're going to have somebody work with you don't like.
But the qualifier's got to be it's dating. It's not a live-in relationship.
It is.
It's
we're going to get in trouble if we keep going down this analogy. But yes, you have many investors.
Right. Before wrapping up too, Brian, and we've really enjoyed this conversation. Any advice? And you kind of gave the scope of the size of a brand, right? Under 1,000 containers, right? You got the FedExes, the DHLs, you've got these all-in-one type of solutions. And then maybe you have this internal expertise and staffing that can't support you if you're between 1,000 and 10,000. Any just advice, thoughts, suggestions for those size companies, how they could help tackle some of these opportunities / problems we've talked about?
The service providers you've worked for have worked with other companies of your size, and you should listen to them. And oftentimes that middle ground is when using their systems makes a lot of sense, even if it means you're not going to necessarily optimize your purchasing on every shipment, right? The amount of energy that I see brands put into shopping every container, if you're doing 5 containers a year and you're bootstrapping, go shop every container, right? That extra $300, $400, $500 may mean something to you. When you're doing 1,000 containers a year, the amount of work that you put on to do 1,000 individual bids and chase the spot market and versus the amount of work a provider can do for me if you just say, look, I'm going to trust you to give me a market rate. We're going to talk again in 6 months. Be fair to me, but I want to use all your systems and I expect visibility and service. Don't over optimize on price, because you will spend more dealing with the exceptions or the lost container or the lost container with somebody you just bought it from off the street who doesn't call you back. It's not worth it. You leverage their IT, and in order to do that, you have to consolidate your spend. And I'm not selling it to anyone, so I'm saying that from an unbiased position.
I think that advice is applicable to across the board,
Absolutely.
Right? Even if you're looking for a 3PL, right? If you're looking for a new e-commerce fulfillment or B2B solution provider, getting that right fit, getting that strategically aligned, someone who knows and understands the size and scale of your business is so important. So I think those are awesome words of advice.
Don't nickel and dime them, because it's a two-way street. And I've had so many customers across every one of those verticals across the years who have nickel and dimed us to the point where we provided them a lower level of service because that's what they were asking us to do. Let them make another $10 on that container if it's going to help them send a they got to fly a salesperson to your office to have a good quarterly business review. Let them build the cost of that flight into their margin.
Great advice. Love it. So Brian, awesome conversation, buddy. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today, and want to give you the opportunity to share with our audience and followers how they could learn more about you, where to find you on social, and also, where do they go to learn as much as they can about chain.io?
So the name is the website, so that's pretty easy, chain.io, spelled like it sounds. You can find us. We're really super active on LinkedIn, and one of our commitments from our social team is we don't just talk about ourselves, we talk about the industry a lot. So we try to be a good content source. If you want to get the spicier version, I'm at bglick, BGLICK on Twitter. You watch me argue with the team in the Journal of Commerce every day, which is one of my things I do for sport. So you get the fun side there.
All right. I'm going to check that out. Awesome, Brian. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Brian. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.